Hello there. It finally arrived yesterday, something that I've wanted to try for a few months now. We are going to look at the cheapest faceting machine I've seen on eBay for just around $200. This was $214 all total. Comes with a 1000 grit disc, a master lap to put the disc on, the machine obviously, a lamp. The motor is mounted above the platform, which is interesting. I guess it saves space in terms of height. A simple speed control inverter so I can plug it in immediately. I don't need another adapter or anything. Mounter for the water container and a little drip thing. This is for securing the mast to the platen here. And then we have our faceting machine head and quill. So this faceting machine head style is similar to the old Lee machines, it's a Lee style basically that they've copied. This is on a spring, you pull it down and then you can adjust what angle you're looking at or what angle you're working with here. And it comes with a single 96 index. So there's our 0 point basically there. And you can swap this head out for other indexes. And these replacement heads are online on eBay anyway for, I don't know, like $10 or something. It's really cheap. But I haven't plugged it in, haven't tested it, and that's what we're going to do together. See how well this all works, what needs to be changed, what works and what doesn't. And the reason I wanted to test this in particular is because on my Q&A video for reaching 1,000 subscribers, someone asked, what do you think about the $200 faceting machines available on eBay? Those are all junk, is my understanding. Everybody says just wasting your money, you're throwing it away. That's kind of what I said at the time, but I didn't have any experience with that. So I don't really want to say something that I haven't tested. But also because, like I said, this is just over $200 in total for all the parts. When you're talking about faceting machines, that is about a tenth of the price of the next most recommended faceting machine, which is a new Raytech-Shaw, which I have a used one. The new ones cost, for kind of this basic equipment, it would be around $2,200, something like that, maybe $2,300. If you get it fully loaded with a couple of laps and other accessories, then it goes up to, I think, closer to $2,500 or $2,600. So we're literally a tenth of the price of those. It's a 20th of a price of a new UltraTec mass style machine, which those are in the $5,000+ range. And so this whole setup here costs less than a new UltraTec splash pan. Or I saw a replacement masthead for an UltraTec V2 model for, I think it was like $200 or $250 on eBay recently. So this is less than a part in one of the more expensive machines. And so I want to test, is this worth 1/10 of those machines? Can you do anything with it? What can you do with it? And let's, I guess, get started, put it together. So about an hour after I hit purchase on my machine from eBay, I heard that Theo Kellison had also bought a similarly cheap but slightly more expensive model of these cheap faceting machines from China. I think it'll be interesting to see the comparison of the price points between his and my machine. So be sure to go give it a like and a look. Whenever it comes up, it'll be in one of these corners here. Whatever he has to do, I'm sure it'll be entertaining because it's Theo. Okay, so that was on. That's not a good start. That was not really spinning, and that means that we're on. Okay, so you have to have the machine on in order for the light to be on. That's unfortunate. Kind of frustrating when you turn it off and the light goes off. And I just realized my mistake there. There is a washer that goes on top. Seems to be directional where it can only go, it goes on well in one direction, but not when it's flipped to 180. And then so the washer gets held on there. So let's start things back up. Interesting. If you go too high, the light starts cutting out. At least it did. Maybe things just have to get warmed up a little bit. pretty high speed. Yep. So what just happened there, because of the way this nut is tightened on, if I have pressure on the lap, then it prevents this from spinning and the thread kind of unscrews itself as it goes. A rather unfavorable design, I guess. To be completely transparent in this video, I didn't purchase this in a vacuum. I also heard from my friend Mike that he's bought a couple of these and kind of put them into production. So we will definitely be bringing this to his shop to fix some of these issues, including rewiring this, have it spin the other way so that this nut does not untighten itself as it rotates, but also potentially to do a bi-directional switch so you can rotate it clockwise or counterclockwise depending on what you want.
Is you're going to have to put another pair of wires here, bring it down here, and either put the motor here or put the motor here, but wire this across like this, like a bridge. That way, when you throw it, center off, the other way, changes direction. There you go. Off. There you go. Now you got forward and reverse.
Beautiful.
And you have a center off, so while you're changing things, you don't have to turn your lamp and everything else off.
Yeah, that was a big annoyance actually. I'm guessing this washer goes on top, and then there's a couple of silicone washers that go on either side, pinching that together. Here's a quick look at the undercarriage. I'll take you off the tripod. We've got our drain tube pulley that's not super tight. It's probably why it was slipping originally. I can move the motor away from the rod there a little bit to tighten that up. I may do that. And there's the bottom of our mast connection. And then we have the wiring, our switch and power control or speed control all in there. It's a lot easier to put this on after the mast is on and after the tube is connected to the bucket there. So we're almost assembled. I just have to put in my bolts. This is the height adjustment, tighten that, and it's secure. And then you can do a fine tune. This part rotates around, and you can see it separating from there, so you can do fine tuning of height adjustments. I think maybe I'll make that just a little bit separate so I can go up or down from that position and tighten that up, and then we'd be ready to go, more or less. I have it plugged in right now, and I don't know if you can tell, but this power unit constantly makes noise as it's just sitting there plugged in. So that would be something to get used to. Now that we have everything assembled, the next thing to look at would be the handpiece / quill, whatever you want to call it. Since it comes apart, it's kind of like the Lee style machine, as I mentioned.
This is too long. They went longer on these. This is more practical for use because you're closer in. If we move this in here like this, now we've got room, plenty of room to get in there.
Yeah, you don't have to go way out.
It's still not going to go any lower, but they should have made the arbor a little bit higher up.
I already have a dop in there in the keyed slot, which it has 3 prongs. And to take it apart, we just unscrew this here, and you don't have to take it all the way off, just loosen it. But I'm going to take it apart just to show. It fits in there pretty snug right now. You can see it's a little bit wider up here, and that's where the keyed nub goes from the dop here. But if you had a stone on here, I could see it being a little tricky to both grab the quill or the quill and the dop and get it in there without loosening the stone or hitting it accidentally. Now, as far as the dops are concerned, as I mentioned, it comes with 3 dops. They are all flat dops of the same diameter, somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 millimeters or so at the top there. That will make it tricky to do the crown on a stone because You usually use the flat dop for doing the pavilion, and then you transfer to a cone or a V-shaped dop in order to do the crown. When you want to do the crown, then you'll need to build up a lot of wax in order to encase the pavilion so it doesn't loosen and you get a good point of contact there. I don't know how cheap or expensive these styles of dops would be from eBay or equivalent. And another thing to keep in mind is that this is my dop for a Raytech-Shaw, and I brought it out because I wanted to show that is a 1/4-inch dop, which is standard on Raytech-Shaw, UltraTec, pretty much all the American machines, or the more popular machines, whereas these ones are 15/64ths, so 0.233 inches, or just under 6 millimeters. These ones, 6.3, or just shy of 2, or 0.25, basically. So there's a little bit of wiggle room, because if it was exact, then you wouldn't be able to slide it in and out. That's another thing to both keep in mind and potentially change. If you want, standard dops, if they are similar to the traditional Lee style dops, then they will exist in American standard units out there on the internet somewhere, but you can't buy those because they would be too big for the Quill. And so what you can do is either machine them down yourself, or gotta look specifically for the 15/64 size Quill dops, or if you know someone with a lathe, then they can go in and sort of drill this out just a little bit and make that standard fit for a 1/4-inch dop. I've taken the headpiece holder off the mast just to show you up close a little bit easier that the other issue with this is that the angle indicator isn't very precise. If you look at it from this position, how would you know if you're right at 32 or what is that, 30? How precise can you be given that this indicator has a very broad, blunt tip to it and may not even be symmetrical? I'm not sure how accurate that is. That's another thing to look at.
So what I normally do is I go on here and I grind this down at an angle like this. So I don't know if you want to do that or not.
When you change indexes to go to, say, 84 here, that's pretty simple. You just kind of push down and go. But if you want to freewheel, which means allowing the stone to rotate independently of the index wheel, rather than take the index wheel out, which I'm not sure this would work properly if you did that. But what you need is some kind of spacer in order to allow you to freewheel, which would keep the little peg there from hitting the index gear and allow you to just rotate freely around. Now, with all that said, and with all the problems that I've mentioned so far, we're going to go over to Mike's shop and see what can be resolved, and maybe see if he has any other suggestions or things that we've missed in terms of fixes or issues with the machine that we need to take care of in order to get it working. And what we want to know is whether it can meet, a basic standards for cutting a stone. I think what we're looking for at a basic level is being able to facet a stone. That's all we really need to do at the end of the day, without it being a total nightmare. So let's go over to Mike's shop and see what he has to say.
Yeah. See there? See the swing?
Yeah, that's about touching, and then it's a couple millimeters off on the far side there.
Yeah. Now we know the mast is straight, right? Okay, let's go in and check different points on here. So I come in here like this to check this bottom here. Now anywhere on here should be, if I'm touching it right there, it should be the same all over.
Yep.
Okay, now I'll go around here, take this in.
Looks like it's too
Thicker
high
here.
Yeah.
Look how far off it is there.
Yeah, that's just bad.
See that? I take it all the way into the center, and then I turn a little bit and come back and forth until I get it all so it's even. Oh, see there?
Yeah, there's a little bit of metal coming up.
side, and you can see even to right here. This side here, we're hitting all the way up and down it, and we're not even touching this side. That means that that whole thing is half cocked.
Yep.
On a slant. So we got to go far enough to where we clean this. This whole thing has to be done until this is clean, all in one motion, all the way across.
Yeah, it's just kissing
See?
it there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's sleeping good. Now the other question is, this one's good. I'm not getting a lot of this. Some of them, you got this business. This one here is running good.
Although we fixed a number of things. Uh-oh. Well, things are almost ready to go here. At Mike's shop, we also made sure this protractor was level, which it actually may not have been at first, by using a digital protractor that we placed on the master lap here, and then calibrated it to 0, and then put it on the Quill here, and had to adjust it slightly. And if you need to do that yourself, it's good to note that the 2 screws that they use to keep the protractor in place, they're both wood screws, and so they have a tapered end. You can kind of see this one that's closest to us here is sticking out a little bit because it's tapered, whereas this one is flush to it because Mike actually used a metal screw. And if you replace one of them with a metal screw, then that gives you just a little bit of wiggle room to move the protractor and get it oriented the way that you need it to make it so, 90 degrees is 90 degrees and 45 is 45, because we were getting 2 to 3 degrees off, something like that. You can see in the background here, I have a little drip bucket underneath my drip bucket. And that's because you can see a little bead of water forming right here on the hose. This is slowly leaking somewhere in here, so I'm going to have to get a new water hose before I do a whole lot of stuff. We are still left with a problem of this is 90 degrees set with our new setting for 90, with our new hard stop for the protractor and our little cheater for the angle.
There we go, and we can do a fine adjustment with a screw here. You can turn this to lower up or down. And you want to change your position, loosen. You can slide it anywhere you want. Set it. Something simple, 50 cents worth.
And we are still several millimeters above the flat lap here. All I can think to do right now is to use my master lap as a base, basically, for another lap. And if I do that, this is a 100 grit disc, then I come down and I'm able to come into contact with this 100 grit disc. I'm very close to 90 right now, so I'm not sure how much of this stone I'll actually be able to grind away. This is about a just under 11 millimeter stone. It's about 10.8 millimeters, I think. My stone size had gotten below 10 millimeters, and that was enough to where I couldn't raise the laps up high enough to create a level girdle. The quill height was always too high to where it would always be resting down and creating a 85 or so degree girdle, which is unacceptable. And also, if you cut less than 10 millimeters, if you want to cut a 7 millimeter stone, you can't do that on this machine, which means we have to find a way to lower the mast even more, like shave off a lot, which doesn't make any sense, or we have to raise up the arbor and the laps themselves, which means getting a bigger arbor, maybe a wider plate here. I don't know what you'd have to do exactly, but I measured, what it would be. And if I could get this to where the bottom of the platen was about where this ends currently, which is about 23, 24 millimeters. So if you raise it up about 25 millimeters, then that would be enough to cut, I think, any size stone on this machine, which unfortunately we don't have a metal stretcher here. And I'm going to have to take this apart, I think, and see, what exactly it's assembled like, and see what we can do for a replacement, either machining or buying one secondhand. Well, I just finished faceting the stone not too long ago in the reverse brilliant design. Still have it dopped up in this 45-degree table adapter that Mike gave me. This did not come with the machine, which is another kind of shortcoming of it. You will need extra parts for sure that don't come with it, like a transfer jig, which I used. And we'll get that out of the way here. So we fixed some of the problems. There are still a couple of minor issues. It's not a perfect stone for sure, but with Mike's help, well, basically what Mike did was he milled out a adapter slash riser where this slips over the arbor there, and there's a set screw that you just tighten with an Allen wrench, and then you can put a lap down on it. This is just a master lap, but tighten that down, and then we spin. And it works really well. It means that I can now facet any size stone with this machine down to, a few millimeters in size and diameter. Now with that on there, actually, I'll leave that on. This is above the splash pan height, so I just cut out a old plastic planter and cut a little divot in that side and used it for my splash pan. And you can see along my backsplash here, it's still very messy. This was kind of before when I was using a paper temporary thing. This is a little bit better. Still, it's kind of messy. Mike's printing a 3D printed splash pan, kind of like this, where it'll go over the lip and have a little bit of a gap there, but obviously it has to be wider than my Raytech-Shaw. For some reason, this splash pan is quite a bit bigger than it needs to be for a 6-inch disc, and yet it's not quite big enough for an 8-inch disc, so you do have to limit yourself to a 6-inch disc if you get this and get laps. I didn't show all the steps that I did for faceting the stone because this isn't a how to facet using a mass machine video. This is a can you facet something with this machine? And we'll check out the results here pretty soon. With these modifications, I think I was able to facet a reasonable stone. There are some compromises that I made. Using the fine adjustment works pretty well. I can move the mast in and out. The drip bucket still leaks. And I did have to cheat, and I started using my lamp for the light because this LED light is just way too bright to see, especially with polish. It just blows out the whole crystal face, especially when you're looking at it under a 10 times loop, which I do for the polish. I would say the most frustrating thing with this now is in setting the angle correctly, just because it's hard to read the numbers still, and it's hard to know exactly where you're pointing at with this dial indicator. So what I think would be good to do is to add an extension to that, or an adapter, or like something that slips over the end that brings it closer to here. It just has a more fine pointer, because for example on my Raytech-Shaw, it's still not super exact, but I've got much finer detail of where I'm pointing at. And even with this, I still struggle a little bit to get kind of like those half degrees. I wouldn't go out and try to polish or try to cut a, 400 facet stone with this machine. You're going to have a little bit of trouble. There's 65 facets altogether, including the girdle. So without that, it's a little under 60. But that wasn't too bad. And you can cut a few stone designs with that pretty simply. It's not too loud, even though the motor is above there. It didn't bog down really when I was cutting or polishing. The other major issue, I think, is in the cheater, where there's not really a 0 point. So you loosen the cheater, and then you can rotate this side to side to, you can see, if you focus on this number here, it moves to the right or it moves to the left. And there's no real 0 point indicator here, so you don't know where you're supposed to start out. And there's a little bit of play in the cheater before it starts to move this. So, you know, that's a little bit janky. But I was able to, that was one of the most troubling parts, is I had to go back a couple times and recut a few things as I was getting started, because the cheater wasn't zeroed and I was getting a little bit of off angle as I went along. And I should mention that even with this riser adapter, which is, you know, it adds another inch or so above where the original plate was, this still isn't enough to use the fine adjustment with the height adapter. You have to take this off and essentially just use half of this. If you have a small stone, then you want to use this and just use that as without a fine adjustment. You just have to be careful about moving that up and down slightly, because with both this and that on there, it's still too high to facet a stone of reasonable size. Well, at the end of the day, we were able to facet a stone. It's not the best stone, I'll admit. I could make it look pretty nice in a video, but the reality is it's actually almost a millimeter, maybe slightly more than a millimeter smaller than it should be in terms of height for the design that I chose. And I think that's because the protractor, I didn't get the angles quite right. It might be faceted closer to like 37 degrees instead of 39 degrees. And so it's a little shallower than it should be, so it's much closer to the refractive index of the neodymium YAG, which is 37-ish, instead of the 39 degrees that I was supposed to have for the pavilion. And you can see, compared to the amethyst in the same design, which the quartz is a taller cut anyway, but you can see it's a lot shallower than it should normally be. The polish itself was good though. The cutting went okay. The cheater was a little bit of a pain, as I said. The main thing I wanted to do was see, could you facet a stone on this? And part of my trouble was, this is my first time using this machine, so there's some learning to do with using a mast again and the angles and everything there. With some practice and figuring out exactly where you need to put the indicator, I think you could cut a pretty nice stone on this overall. Not a super fancy stone maybe, but if you're just interested in faceting a couple of stones, you can get this and cut something reasonable if you make some adjustments. And I have my list here of changes that we've made and things to do for the machines, so I'll run through them. What we did for this machine was we lathed / milled. If you have a milling machine, it would go a lot quicker, but we lathed the base of the mast to make it flat because it was not perpendicular to the lap. So your stone will run parallel to the lap as you go back and forth, which is very important. That's one of the most important changes that we made here. And Mike said that one of the machines he bought, everything was perfectly perpendicular and lined where it should be, but 3 other machines now have been off kilter. Another convenient feature was the lap directional switch for doing counterclockwise instead of clockwise, so the spray goes away from you, and there are some discs that are counterclockwise versus clockwise in terms of how they work best. And also, he made a couple of new washers for the mast base locking mechanism. So washers for that make that more secure and it won't squish like the plastic ones were. Mike also 3D printed an angle stop block for the protractor, and this has a cheater, so you can go up and down once you get close to where you need to be for fine tuning. And this is also convenient since I had angles that were only 4 degrees difference. Instead of adjusting the stop block, I was just able to adjust the screw and go up and down those 4 degrees very easily. Mike also fine-tuned and kind of changed this into more of a point for the angle indicator to better choose where you are and see where you are in terms of what angle you're pointing to. But that obviously still needs some work since I didn't have the correct angle on my stone that I cut. And we also checked the protractor. It may not have been at 90, I can't remember. We kind of started adjusting it on the fly before I was really sure if it was actually not 90. But I think we made it 90. I think it should be double checked just one more time with a digital gauge or something like that would be the best way. And I can't find it right now, but Mike made a freewheeler that would go in and raise this up and keep it locked up like this. So you can just spin and preform a round stone, make that easier. And Mike also made a lap height adjuster collar, which I showed earlier, that goes over the arbor, raises the lap height, and allows you to cut a stone at 90 degrees. When the lap is high, you need a new splash guard. So I made a quick and dirty one, but Mike's going to 3D print one that'll look a lot nicer and work a little better in terms of leaving it on there maybe. And maybe you can just leave the lap permanently high like that unless you need to do a really big stone and you need more space. I also got a longer drain hose because the one that came with it was only about a foot long, which would barely hang over the edge of the table. This one reaches down to my drip bucket down there. And speaking of drip buckets, the feeder for this hose is still leaking. I didn't fix that. You just need a new hose. I think these are pretty cheap, but I just didn't want to wait for the shipping to come and do it. So I just dealt with the drip by putting a bucket underneath it. So because this is a mass style machine, you could potentially bring this over here and have this at 90 degrees and cut a table, but that's not the best way, or that's not really a best practice method of doing that. You could damage some of this assembly. And so in order to do a table, you normally need a 45-degree adapter, which this did not come with, but Mike has 3D printed them with just a screw, and this is permanently mounted in there at 45 degrees. That goes in there, and then you can set it down on there and make sure that you're level, and then stick the stone in there to cut the table. And that's what I did. Mike is 3D printing transfer jigs. This is for a short dop style like I have for this machine. And so I was able to transfer using a hybrid epoxy wax and superglue method. I think if you didn't want to deal with heat too much or wax, then epoxy would probably be the best way to go. And also for the dops themselves, it just comes with 3 flat dops, which I was able to use because this is a shallow, small stone. But if you had a bigger stone, you might need a cone dop. So you would either need to make or buy cone and V tip dops and maybe some other sizes. But you could get started with the 3 dops that they have available. And also, as I said, I did cheat with my light source where their LED light is way too bright. So I started using my Raytech-Shaw light, which is a single filament clear bulb. It's an appliance bulb. And it's a lot better for seeing the polish of a facet, where this just blows it out and it's kind of blinds you temporarily if you look at it. So with all those changes and upgrades and fixes, yes, you can cut a stone with this machine, but straight out of the box, you're gonna have a bad time. I think it would have been a total nightmare to try this on my own. Thankfully, Mike has generously donated his time and materials and knowledge to fix this up. And what I wanted to do was share what he had to offer with everybody else out there. So this is, more of a Mike video than my video at this point, because he's done so much to this machine and I've just been kind of recording it. And I wanted to share it with you. If you get a machine like this, you got to keep in mind that you're going to have to do a lot of fixes and upgrades. And there are some other things that you could do, like make these little knobs better, put maybe something on there to grip it better, because if your hands are wet, it's really hard to adjust that sometimes. And those are more cosmetic or ease of use things. I can say what I thought of this machine, but it's really up to you if you would want to buy something like this. But you should have the capability to fix or make things in order to make this functional, because out of the box, it is not. But if you have maybe a little bit of experience with facetors or some technical knowledge in terms of equipment manufacturing and that kind of thing, or you have somebody like Mike in your neighborhood that could do lots of this work for you, then maybe this would be a good machine for you. But I I really wanted to try this because at $200, like I said, it's way cheaper than any other faceting machine out there, and as you see, for good reason. I don't mean to pick on Raytech-Shaw too much, but they just have an example that I conveniently am able to use where Jared from Currently Rock Hounding is going through Rock and Gem magazines, and he found an ad from 1978 that had a Raytech-Shaw set up kind of like what I have for $538 or $78 in 1978, which adjusted for inflation is $2,370. You can buy a new Raytech-Shaw today, the same setup that was available in 1978, for $2,358. So in almost 40 years now, the price of the machine has stayed the same, and for improvements, you can only go so far, The machining is certainly better, I won't argue that. The V2 versus the V5 for the UltraTecs are definitely different in terms of their machining and precision and smoothness, all that stuff. There are improvements. It's not just they're not keeping the price steady. I'm not saying that. In 40 years, it seems like you should be able to. And I'll check with Mike, but I think what he was saying when I was in his shop working on this, that if someone in the Pacific Northwest gets one of these machines, maybe they could talk to him and either send it to him, or if they're in a relatively close distance, come on by and stop by his shop, and he'll be able to do a lot of this work at a reasonable price and get some of these machines up and running for, intro lapidary enthusiasts. If that's not the case, I'll cut that from the video, but I should probably have more of a dramatic ending to this video, but I feel like I'm repeating myself already. So, I did forget that some of these models, I think at least one of them has a digital protractor, which may help with that, but it was like another $100 or $150 for that, so I didn't want to spring for that just for this video. That may solve the protractor issues, and you'll be on your way a lot quicker. So if you've made it this far in the video, you probably subscribed already, but if not, please subscribe, give the video a like, it really helps. Maybe a comment if you have any suggestions, or if you have one of these machines and need some help fixing it up. Maybe we can help you out here. I guess that'll do it for me, so see ya. I did forget that I was able to use my Raytech-Shaw laps because they're 6-inch and fit on the 6-inch machine. If you invest in 6-inch lapidary discs, then you will be able to use them on another machine, obviously. Even if you get an UltraTec, you can use a 6-inch disc on those machines, so you're not necessarily throwing your money away if you get discs. But if you don't have a lot of money to invest in discs, you can do what I have and use topper discs for a lot of cases where you can get everything, 1200 grit and coarser is okay in a topper disc. Some people say 1200 isn't good, but I've been using it reasonably well. And those are, $10 a piece, $6 to $10, depending on, the source you get. You don't need to get a $45 topper disc. They're not worth it. Stack up on, 3 or 4 discs, run you $30. You have a master lap that comes with this kit, so you can just put those on there and get to work. And really what you would need to invest in is some kind of polishing lap, which I have a tin lap with diamond, 50,000 diamond, that I go from 1200 to polish. Works great. A lot of people have a lot of opinions on polish, so I won't get into it too much, but you can do a little research and find the best disc and polish that works for you. And with an investment in those discs, then if you upgrade your machine, you'll have nice discs to go with a nice machine, and you'll be even better off in starting out. Okay, now we're done.